The Stellar Confederacy had been governing the known galaxy for approximately 12,000 standard rotations, which was either an impressive achievement in political longevity or a damning indictment of how little had actually changed in all that time. Probably both. The Confederacy operated on principles that its founding members liked to call enlightened meritocracy, which translated roughly to, "We were here first, so we're obviously better than you." This philosophy had served them reasonably well, mostly because nobody had bothered to challenge it. And challenging ancient political structures required energy that most species preferred to spend on more productive activities, like trade, exploration, or complaining about the Confederacy's decisions without actually doing anything about them. The governmental seat existed in a pocket dimension called the Nexus Point, accessible only through carefully controlled quantum gateways. Because apparently even the location of your capital needed to scream exclusive. The Nexus Assembly Hall was a masterwork of architectural intimidation, designed by species who understood that if you couldn't impress people with your policies, you could at least overwhelm them with real estate. The structure defied conventional physics in at least 6 ways, featured materials from 400 different worlds, and incorporated lighting that adjusted based on the collective, emotional state of attendees, which meant it was usually some shade of smug purple. Representatives from 519 member species gathered here monthly to conduct what they called essential governance, but what mostly amounted to elaborate theater. Each species occupied a designated station, arranged in 7 ascending tiers, with placement determined by a complex algorithm that factored in length of membership, economic contribution, military strength, and how many times your species had hosted the annual summit without complaining about the cleanup costs. The founding species, the Kethran Directorate, occupied the lowest tier closest to the central platform, because in Confederacy logic, proximity to the action equaled importance. Everyone else ascended outward and upward in decreasing relevance. Humanity occupied Station 417 in the 7th tier, squeezed between the Yarvix Collective, whose primary export was existential philosophy nobody asked for, and the disputed territories of Braxis 9, who spent most sessions arguing with themselves about internal politics. This placement was the Confederacy's polite way of saying, "We acknowledge your existence, but please don't expect us to care." Earth had been granted provisional membership exactly 3 standard rotations ago, following a bureaucratic process that involved 14,000 pages of documentation, 600 hours of testimony, and at least 1 incident where a human delegate had asked if anyone had actually read the membership bylaws, causing a minor diplomatic crisis when the answer turned out to be, "Not recently." The human representative arrived through the quantum gateway at precisely the scheduled time, which marked her as either hopelessly naive about Confederacy customs or deliberately making a point. Punctuality was considered somewhat gauche among species who measured their lifespans in centuries and viewed time as more of a suggestion than a requirement. She materialized on the 7th tier platform wearing a navy blue suit that looked positively minimalist compared to the ceremonial garb, bioluminescent displays, and gravitational field manipulators that passed for formal wear among the other delegates. Her auburn hair was styled in a practical twist, her face composed, her posture suggesting someone who knew exactly where she was and had decided not to be impressed by any of it. The assembly hall thrummed with pre-session activity. Delegates socialized in carefully orchestrated patterns that looked casual, but actually followed complex protocols about who could approach whom and in what order. Holographic displays floated throughout the space, showing everything from economic data to celebrity gossip from 14 different civilizations. The ambient lighting cycled through self-satisfied purples and oranges, occasionally spiking into smug gold when someone made a particularly well-received observation about their own species' accomplishments. High Chancellor Vethric, a Kethran whose species resembled what might happen if you crossed a spider with a philosophy professor and gave the result a superiority complex, activated the ceremonial resonator to call the session to order. The device emitted a harmonic frequency that translated across all known perceptual spectrums, which was impressive but also slightly nauseating if you happened to be standing too close to it. Several delegates made small adjustments to their translation matrices and sensory filters. We convene the 942nd monthly session of the Stellar Confederacy, Vethric announced, his vocalization creating visible ripples in the air around his speaking platform. Today's agenda includes resource allocation disputes, the Meridian Trade Corridor expansion proposal, updated protocols for first contact scenarios, and the continued provisional assessment of species designation Terra Human Sol 3. The way he pronounced humanity's designation made it sound like a clerical error that everyone was too polite to correct. A subtle shift occurred in the assembly's attention, several hundred beings suddenly remembering that humans existed and were technically present. The human delegate didn't react to the scrutiny, merely folded her hands and observed the proceedings with the patience of someone who had learned that alien bureaucracy moved at speeds that made continental drift look hasty. The first 2 hours proceeded according to standard Confederacy protocols, meaning with all the urgency of continental erosion. The Quarex Federation disputed mining rights with the Silicon Concordat, producing geological surveys dating back 4,000 rotations and arguing about interpretations of pre-Confederacy territorial agreements. A species whose name sounded like wind chimes and meant the luminous inheritors of cosmic wisdom presented their annual report on nothing in particular, but with such elaborate vocabulary that it took 40 minutes. The Meridian Trade Corridor proposal sparked a debate about whether expanding commercial routes would disrupt traditional shipping patterns, which somehow evolved into a philosophical discussion about the nature of progress. Through it all, the human delegate remained still, watching, learning the rhythms of this cosmic theater, taking mental notes that would later be filed in reports that approximately 4 people on Earth would actually read. Then came Agenda Item 23. The matter of provisional status review for Terra Human Sol 3, Vethric announced, and suddenly the diffuse attention of 519 species focused with laser precision on the tiny platform in the 7th tier. A Dracorian delegate named Sarthax rose from his 3rd tier station. The Dracorians were a reptilian species whose scales could shift colors to express emotion, social status, or threats, depending on context. Right now, Sarthax displayed aggressive patterns of crimson and black that suggested he was about to enjoy himself immensely. High Chancellor, I bring formal review of humanity's provisional status, along with concerns about their suitability for continued Confederacy membership. The floor recognizes Sarthax of the Dracorian sovereignty, Vethric replied, settling into his seat with the air of someone about to watch an entertaining show that he definitely hadn't helped orchestrate. Sarthax activated a holographic projection system that materialized above the central platform, displaying various images and data compilations. Honored delegates, where does one even begin with the human question? In the 3 rotations since their admission, humanity has demonstrated a consistent pattern of behavior that raises serious questions about their readiness for civilized galactic society. They disregard established protocols, their technology borders on primitive, and their approach to virtually every situation ranges from baffling to actively concerning. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several tiers of the assembly. Specificity would be appreciated, Vethric prompted, though his tone suggested he already knew and approved of what was coming. Gladly. Sarthax's hologram shifted to display a human starship. 8 months ago, the human vessel designated Columbus made first contact with a Confederacy survey team in the Kepler 442 system. Standard protocol for such encounters is clearly outlined in the First Contact Handbook, Section 7000 through 7093. The procedure involves sequential communication attempts using mathematical principles, followed by carefully structured exchanges of cultural information, culminating in formal introduction only after mutual understanding is established. The entire process typically takes 6 to 8 standard days. He paused for effect. The human captain skipped all of that and immediately transmitted, "Greetings from Earth. Anyone want to grab coffee?" Coffee. As if centuries of carefully developed diplomatic procedure could be replaced with caffeinated beverages and casual pleasantries. Several delegates made sounds of disapproval, ranging from clicks to subsonic vibrations. "Their vessels," Sarthax continued, warming to his subject like a prosecutor who'd been saving his best evidence, "are constructed using what can only be described as primitive metallurgy. Welded alloys, mechanical fasteners, chemical propulsion for maneuvering thrusters. We've analyzed their engineering specifications, and in at least 3 documented cases, human ships included components held together with an adhesive polymer they call duct tape. Our material scientists initially thought this was a translation error until we confirmed that yes, humans actually use reinforced fabric tape for emergency repairs on vessels traveling at faster than light velocities." A Kethran council member leaned forward, her crystalline features refracting light in patterns that indicated fascinated horror. "Perhaps the humans are simply economically disadvantaged. They are a newly spacefaring species working with limited resources. Limited resources they squander on the most inefficient endeavors," interjected a luminary delegate, whose form resembled concentrated light given consciousness and apparently strong opinions. "They dispatch research expeditions to catalog stellar phenomena we fully documented 6,000 rotations ago. They establish colonies on marginally habitable worlds instead of focusing on optimal environments. They produce artistic and cultural works at a rate that suggests their entire civilization is perpetually distracted from more productive activities. They argue," added a voice from the Yarvik's collective, the philosophical species that apparently recognized kindred spirits in pointless debate. "Constantly, among themselves. We've monitored their public communications networks. They cannot achieve consensus on basic, factual matters. They have information systems specifically designed to facilitate disagreement. They call it social media, and from what we can determine, its primary function is to ensure that no human ever agrees with any other human about anything." The human delegate remained motionless on her 7th-tier platform, her expression unchanged. A less experienced diplomat might have shown anger, might have jumped to defend their species. She simply watched, her face a study in professional neutrality. Sarthax wasn't finished. His scales rippled with satisfaction as he moved to his next point. "And perhaps most troubling is humanity's bizarre relationship with danger. When confronted with unknown phenomena, rational species conduct comprehensive analysis, consult expert consensus, implement safety protocols, and proceed with appropriate caution. Humans approach danger with what they call curiosity. We have documented instances of human researchers deliberately exposing themselves to potentially lethal situations simply to observe outcomes. They have an expression for this behavior: for science. As if intellectual curiosity justifies reckless self-endangerment. They consume toxins recreationally, offered a Kethran elder from the 1st tier. We've analyzed their dietary customs, capsaicin compounds that cause measurable neural pain responses, ethanol that impairs cognitive function, theobromine that would be lethal to many species. And they ingest these substances voluntarily, repeatedly, sometimes in social rituals specifically designed around consumption of materials that harm them. Caffeine, someone added from the middle tiers. They're systematically addicted to a stimulant alkaloid that alters brain chemistry. 73% of adult humans consume it daily. They build entire social structures around caffeine distribution. They have shops dedicated exclusively to serving it in increasingly complicated preparations. The criticisms were building momentum now, each delegate adding their observations to a growing pile of evidence that humanity was, at best, charmingly incompetent and, at worst, a threat to themselves and possibly others. Their planet of origin is classified as a Class 4 hazard world, Sarthax declared, his hologram now showing images of Earth in various states of meteorological violence. Gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared, which they consider standard. Atmospheric pressure that would crush species from lower gravity environments. Weather systems that include frozen precipitation, electrical discharge storms, and cyclonic formations with wind velocities exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Regular seismic activity, active volcanism, an atmosphere with 21% oxygen content, sufficient to support rapid combustion. The images shifted to show Earth's wildlife, and several delegates made sounds of distress. The fauna, Sarthax continued, includes apex predators that hunt in coordinated groups using complex tactics. Marine organisms massing over 30,000 kilograms, insects that inject neurotoxic venom, microorganisms that cause systemic failures. And humans evolved alongside all of this, which explains virtually everything about their psychological profile. They developed intelligence not through peaceful contemplation, but through constant survival pressure. They're the product of a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill them. A delegate from the wisdom circles, a species known for measured philosophical discourse, spoke in carefully modulated tones that somehow still managed to sound condescending. What my esteemed colleague is perhaps articulating is that humanity represents a fundamental incompatibility with Confederacy values. They are chaotic where we prize order, impulsive where we value deliberation, primitive where we celebrate advancement. Not malicious, necessarily, but certainly unprepared for the responsibilities and expectations of membership in a sophisticated galactic community. That was when High Chancellor Vethric made his catastrophic error in judgment. I find myself in agreement with the assessments presented, the Chancellor said, his voice carrying the weight of 12,000 rotations of accumulated authority. Humanity embodies everything the Stellar Confederacy was founded to transcend: violence, disorder, inefficiency, recklessness. They are, in essence, sophisticated primitives who stumbled into faster-than-light travel through what our analysts can only describe as improbable luck and stubborn refusal to acknowledge impossibility. Perhaps in another millennium, once they've had adequate time to develop actual civilization, we might reconsider their application. But at this moment, he made a dismissive gesture with one of his appendages that was probably meant to look regal, but came across as imperious. They are barely more than clever animals who learned to build starships. Crude approximations of civilization, certainly not worthy of standing in this assembly alongside species who have cultivated wisdom, culture, and genuine advancement over thousands of rotations. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or complete disasters, with very little middle ground between the two. 518 species waited to see how the human would respond to what amounted to a galactic-scale declaration that her entire species was essentially unfit for polite society. Would she rage? Would she deliver an impassioned defense? Would she storm out, creating a diplomatic incident that would be studied in political science courses for centuries? The human delegate did none of those things. She simply raised her right hand, extended her middle finger toward the center platform, and held the gesture in perfect, absolute stillness. To 96% of the species present, this meant absolutely nothing. It was just a human holding up a single digit. Odd behavior, perhaps, but hardly interpretable without cultural context. But the 4% who had studied human customs, who had access to Earth's cultural databases, who understood the nuances of human nonverbal communication, they went very, very, very still. "Is this?" Vethric began, genuine confusion evident in his harmonic speech patterns. Some form of human greeting ritual? A gesture of acknowledgement we're unfamiliar with? The human delegate said nothing. The finger remained raised. Her expression was serene, almost meditative, like someone who had achieved a moment of perfect zen while simultaneously telling 519 species exactly where they could shove their opinions. "Someone translate," demanded a luminary council member. "What is the meaning of this gesture?" A small furry species from the outer tiers, the Pixarian Union, whose entire civilization was built on information brokering and cultural analysis, activated their translation matrix. After a moment of processing, their representative spoke in a high, uncertain voice that suggested they couldn't quite believe what they were about to say. It's a human expression of profound contempt. Specifically, it's considered one of their most offensive gestures. The literal translation involves an anatomically improbable suggestion about what the recipient should do with themselves. But the functional meaning is essentially, "I reject your authority and hold you in the lowest possible regard." The assembly hall erupted into chaos. "She's insulting us. The audacity is unprecedented. Remove her immediately. This violation of protocol demands, how dare she?" Vethric struck the ceremonial resonator repeatedly, the harmonic waves becoming increasingly dissonant as he tried to restore order to an assembly that had descended into the diplomatic equivalent of a bar fight. "Human delegate, you will lower your hand and issue a formal apology immediately." The human delegate lowered her hand, slowly, deliberately. Then she spoke for the first time since entering the assembly, her voice clear and carrying perfectly through the chamber's acoustics, despite the chaos. "No." That single syllable somehow cut through 500 voices. "No?" Vethric repeated, as if the word existed in some alien language he'd never encountered. "No," she confirmed, her tone conversational. "I will not apologize. You want to discuss humanity being crude, primitive, unworthy of this assembly? Excellent. Let's have that discussion. But we're going to do it with data instead of rhetoric." She tapped a control interface on her wrist, and suddenly humanity's 7th-tier platform erupted with holographic displays. Data streams, technical specifications, charts and graphs and information that began spreading throughout the assembly's central display system, overriding Sarthax's presentation with the kind of aggressive efficiency that suggested someone had spent considerable time learning the Confederacy systems and figuring out exactly how to hijack them. "You mentioned our ship construction," she began, her tone suggesting someone settling in for a lengthy conversation, whether anyone wanted to have it or not. "The Columbus and its offensive casualness. Let's discuss that vessel. It was constructed in Earth's orbital shipyards using materials refined from asteroid mining operations. Total construction cost in Confederacy standard credits, approximately 9 million. Now let's compare that to, say, a Kethron exploration vessel of equivalent function." The display showed 2 ships side by side, with detailed cost breakdowns. This is your Enlightenment-class Explorer. Beautiful vessel. Crystalline hull architecture. Quantum processing cores. Bio-neural navigation systems. Gravitational field manipulation. Very impressive. Construction cost, 1,200,000,000 credits. And you know what? They perform almost identical functions. Both conduct scientific surveys. Both transport research teams. Both explore unknown stellar regions. The Columbus does it for 0.75% of the cost. She paused, letting that sink into the collective consciousness of 519 species. But here's where it gets interesting. 14 months ago, the Columbus encountered an unexpected plasma cascade in the Barnard system. Plasma densities that should have overwhelmed every system on board, fried their electronics, and left them drifting. You know what happened? The crew rerouted power through backup systems, used those primitive mechanical fasteners to reinforce compromised hull sections, and yes, used duct tape to seal environmental breaches, while they jury-rigged their sensors to function in conditions they were never designed for. They survived. They adapted. They improvised a solution with materials on hand. 6 months later, an Enlightenment-class vessel encountered similar conditions. It didn't adapt. It didn't improvise. All crew lost, because when their sophisticated systems failed, they had no backup plan, no duct tape to save them. Sarthak started to object, but she spoke over him with the confidence of someone who had 3 rotations worth of ammunition and no intention of running out. You mentioned our faster-than-light drives being primitive. You're absolutely correct. We call it the Alcubierre Tanaka drive, and it's based on theoretical physics from our 21st century, ancient by Confederacy standards, crude, inefficient. And you know what else it is? It's cheap. It's reliable. It can be manufactured in basically any facility with adequate power generation and raw material access. Last rotation, the Dracorian Sovereignty suffered a catastrophic cascade failure in their primary shipyard. Set back their production schedule by 7 rotations. Want to guess who stepped in to help? She didn't wait for anyone to answer. Humanity. We built them 12 vessels using our primitive technology in the time it took them to repair their facilities. 12 ships currently serving in their merchant and exploration fleets, running trade routes, generating revenue, conducting research. Those obsolete drives? They're keeping Dracorian commerce operational. You're welcome, by the way. The display shifted to medical data, genetic comparisons, pharmaceutical information. You call Earth a hazard world. Guilty. Our gravity is punishing, our weather is violent, our wildlife is terrifying. You know what that means? It means humans are resilient. It means we heal remarkably fast. It means our immune systems have been fighting off pathogens for millions of years and are exceptionally, almost absurdly good at it. 5 months ago, a viral outbreak occurred on Station Luminar 5. 80% fatality rate among the species stationed there. Quarantine protocols failed. The station was dying. Humanity sent medical teams. And you know why we could help when nobody else could? Because we've been dealing with pandemics since we lived in caves. We have institutional knowledge about containment, treatment, vaccine development, and crisis management that goes back thousands of years. We saved that station. Those crude Death World primitives saved 23,000 lives. She was building momentum now, her presentation shifting from defense to methodical dismantling of every criticism that had been raised. Let's discuss curiosity, since that apparently bothers you. Yes, we explore phenomena you already cataloged. And you know what we keep finding? Errors, omissions, things you missed because you were satisfied with your initial analysis. The Orion Nebula? Your 12,000 rotation old record said it was stable. Our wasteful expedition discovered a pending stellar collapse that would have destroyed 4 colonies if we hadn't raised the alarm. The Andromeda Rift? Your ancient data said it was a void. We found protoplanetary formations that are revolutionizing our understanding of stellar system development. Your problem isn't that we're curious. Your problem is that we don't accept already known as sufficient reason to stop looking. We verify. We question. We investigate again, because sometimes the wisdom of the ancients is just really old mistakes that nobody bothered to check. Vethric attempted to interrupt. This is hardly relevant to. I'm not finished, she said. And something in her tone made a being who had governed for 12,000 rotations actually pause mid-sentence. You want to talk about arguments? About humanity's inability to achieve consensus? You're absolutely right. We argue constantly. We debate everything from philosophy to science to what constitutes proper pizza toppings. And you know what that creates? Innovation, progress, intellectual evolution. You want to know how many significant technological breakthroughs the Confederacy has achieved in the last 1,000 rotations. The display showed a number. 63. 63 in 1,000 rotations. Humanity has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries, and we've contributed 24 significant advancements in the last 3 rotations alone. 24. You know why? Because we argue. Because we don't have a confederacy telling us what's already known and what's not worth investigating. Because some human somewhere always asks, but what if we tried this? Even when everyone else thinks it's idiotic. Because we don't achieve consensus before we innovate. We innovate and then argue about whether it was a good idea. She activated another data set, and this one caused actual gasps from several delegates who bothered to read the summary before the detailed breakdown. This is a dependency analysis compiled by your own Confederacy Statistical Bureau. It shows which Confederacy technologies, systems, and operations currently rely on human innovations or contributions. Care to guess the percentage? Nobody answered. Several delegates were frantically reviewing the data, their reactions ranging from surprise to alarm. 31%. In 3 rotations, humanity has become integral to nearly 1/3 of Confederacy operations. That duct tape approach you mock? It solved a critical material shortage in your shipbuilding industry when your sophisticated supply chains failed. Our crude medical knowledge? It's the foundation for new protocols in 82% of Confederacy medical facilities. Those toxins we consume for pleasure? Capsaicin is now being used in pain management therapies across 200 worlds. Caffeine is enhancing cognitive function for species who couldn't benefit from traditional stimulants. Even ethanol, which you find barbaric, is being studied for applications in metabolic treatments and industrial processes. The assembly hall had gone almost silent, every being focused on the human and her relentless data presentation. But you know what really bothers you? She leaned forward slightly, and her smile was not pleasant. It's not that we're crude or primitive. It's that we don't know our place. We're supposed to be grateful that you allowed us into your exclusive club. We're supposed to sit in the 7th tier, speak only when spoken to, and spend the next millennium trying to become more like you. More sophisticated, more refined, more stagnant. She let that word hang in the air like an accusation. Here's what terrifies you about humanity. We don't want to be like you. We don't aspire to spend thousands of rotations debating trade routes and congratulating ourselves on how advanced we are. We don't want to become so cautious that we stop exploring, so satisfied that we stop innovating, so convinced of our own wisdom that we stop questioning. You've built a civilization on the principle that age equals superiority, that longevity proves worth. And then humans showed up, held together with duct tape and stubbornness, and we started solving problems you'd accepted as permanent. We started innovating in fields you'd declared fully explored. We started asking questions you decided had already been answered. She activated one final comprehensive display, a timeline showing Confederacy history overlaid with human achievements. And the comparison was damning. You've existed for 12,000 rotations. In that time, you've expanded to 519 member species, mapped 40 million stellar systems, and established a governmental structure that has remained essentially unchanged for millennia. Very stable, very sophisticated, very proud of yourselves. Humanity has existed as a spacefaring civilization for 193 years. In that time, we've established colonies on 62 worlds, made first contact with 147 species, contributed to roughly a third of your operational infrastructure. And yes, we've made mistakes. Countless mistakes. We've crashed ships, violated protocols, and probably broken half the rules in your handbooks. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried absolute conviction. But we've also saved lives you'd given up on. We've solved problems you'd accepted as unsolvable. We've brought perspectives you never considered because you were too busy being sophisticated to try anything unsophisticated. So yes, we're crude. Yes, we're primitive. Yes, we hold things together with duct tape and stubbornness and consume toxins for fun. And we're still here. We're still contributing. We're still moving forward while you sit in this assembly debating whether we're worthy of your approval. The silence was absolute. 519 species processing what had just happened, which was essentially a newly admitted provisional member telling the entire Confederacy that their opinion was irrelevant and backing it up with their own statistics. So here's my response to your provisional review, she said, her voice dropping to something almost casual. Humanity formally withdraws its application for full membership in the Stellar Confederacy. The silence shattered. What? They cannot. This is unprecedented. She raised her voice, cutting through the chaos. However, we're pleased to maintain our current associate status indefinitely. We'll continue contributing our crude, primitive solutions to your sophisticated problems. We'll keep showing up with our duct-taped ships and our obsolete technology and our dangerous curiosity. And when you need someone to take risks you consider beneath you, when you need someone to explore phenomena you think you've fully understood, when you need someone to question assumptions you've held for millennia, you know exactly where to find us. She tapped her wrist control, and all the displays vanished simultaneously. We'll be in the 7th tier if you need us. We have work to do. And with that, she simply sat down and waited. The Stellar Confederacy Assembly descended into the most comprehensive chaos in its 12,000 rotation history. Factions formed within seconds. The Dracorian delegation immediately moved to grant humanity full membership in recognition of their shipbuilding assistance, conveniently omitting that they'd been criticizing humans minutes earlier. The Luminary Collective seconded the motion, citing human medical contributions. The Kethrin Directorate found themselves in the awkward position of having their Chancellor's dismissive speech directly contradicted by their own dependency statistics. Vethric, demonstrating the political survival instincts that had kept him in power for so long, recognized when he'd been completely outmaneuvered. The High Chancellor called for order, then called for a brief recess, then finally called for an emergency vote on humanity's status that everyone understood was really just a face-saving formality. When the Assembly reconvened 3 hours later, the resolution was unanimous. Humanity was granted full membership, assigned a station in the third tier, and formally invited to present their research findings at the next Grand Symposium. The human delegate accepted with a polite nod and zero visible satisfaction, which somehow made the whole situation even more humiliating for everyone who'd spent the last 3 hours scrambling to avoid looking like idiots. As the session adjourned and delegates began departing through quantum gateways, the Pixarian representative approached the human's platform. The small, furry being looked up at her with what might have been admiration or possibly fear. That was quite possibly the most effective presentation in Confederacy history. How long have you been preparing that analysis? The human smiled. Since the day we were admitted. We knew this review was coming. We knew exactly what arguments would be made against us. So we documented everything, every contribution, every innovation, every time our supposedly primitive approach solved a supposedly sophisticated problem. We prepared for the day someone would question whether we belonged here. And the gesture at the beginning? That? The human's smile widened slightly. That was personal. Sometimes you need to remind people that being civilized doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It means choosing when and how to push back. The Pixarian made a chittering sound that might have been laughter. You humans are going to change the Confederacy. That's the idea, she agreed. Someone needs to keep things from fossilizing completely. As she departed through the quantum gateway, the human allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. The withdrawal threat had been calculated, based on her assessment that the Confederacy needed humanity more than they wanted to admit. The data had confirmed it, but data was only effective when presented at precisely the right moment with precisely the right framing. And sometimes, that framing required a single raised finger to cut through 12,000 rotations of accumulated pretension. 4 months later, human-designed backup systems became mandatory requirements for all Confederacy vessels. 8 months after that, humanity's medical protocols were adopted across 60% of member species. Within 2 rotations, human teams were leading exploration initiatives into regions the Confederacy had written off as fully cataloged, and finding things that rewrote textbooks. The crude, primitive, duct tape-loving humans had arrived, and the galaxy would never be quite as sophisticated again. Which was exactly the point, because civilization, as humanity understood it, wasn't about achieving perfect advancement and then preserving it under glass for millennia. It was about constant evolution, persistent adaptation, and the willingness to question whether the old ways were actually the best ways or just the comfortable ways. It was about looking at a problem everyone said was solved and asking, but what if we tried this? It was about surviving on a death world long enough to develop a species-wide attitude that could best be summarized as, I wonder what happens if. The Stellar Confederacy had spent 12,000 rotations building a civilization based on accumulated wisdom, careful preservation of knowledge, and the assumption that longevity proved superiority. Humanity arrived with enthusiasm, curiosity, and complete disregard for the concept of, that's impossible according to established theory. Turns out, when you combine ancient wisdom with reckless innovation, when you mix sophisticated experience with crude determination, you get something neither approach could achieve alone. You get actual progress. And if that progress occasionally smelled like duct tape, caffeine, and questionable life choices, well, the universe would just have to adapt. Because humanity wasn't going anywhere. They were just getting started. And somewhere in the nexus point, in the permanent archives of the Stellar Confederacy, A recording of that session played on repeat in diplomatic training courses as an example of what happens when you confuse age with wisdom and sophistication with superiority. The most valuable lesson, the instructors emphasized, wasn't about the data or the arguments or even the political maneuvering. It was about the finger. Because sometimes, the most sophisticated response to pretension is a single, simple gesture that says everything that needs to be said. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.